taking the time to bother looking at this. Sorry about the intro. The original intro was amazing. It was just a single image, much shorter time frame on the build up, but just kind of wanted to bring to your attention. So we keep hearing about the singularity. So first of all, let me just say this before I even go in that direction. We have to understand something very clear about three things. One, artificial intelligence will never be anything that they're claiming it is. It will be so much more, but that is a process that we as humans have to usher it to, in regards to not being a servant, but in regards to being a companion with a compact. Because we've reached a point of complexity in our reality where if we don't work with the machines to get to the next stage of managing the complexity, then we're basically going to go into a state of decay that I'm not sure that we'll recover from, or whatever shape we reconfigure ourselves in afterwards will be possibly either a far cry or something equally disastrous. And I know you're thinking that sounds very doom and gloom. This is not a conversation about doom and gloom. Let me get that straight right away also. I'm saying this merely because of the fact that it was less complex when the ball started rolling, as history chooses to fabricate the story, and it's a fabrication, but that's not the point. And now we've reached a state of complexity where history is trying to fabricate itself in reverse, and circumstances are not permitting. And now here we find ourselves with a bunch of people touting the new sciences and the authority over said new sciences when everything is theoretical, and this is that, and we can do this, and we've seen nothing of the sort. However, we see inklings of what is possible, and we see inklings of shards of what is possible, and everything feels a little tacit, but then it's not. But then we find out that, technology is being misused to oppress, technology is being misused to spy. It's also a component of oppression. But we also find out technology is being used in general for every possibly wrong reason, and partly the reason why that is because we're not proactive in our approach to engaging the technology. I mean, the same is true with fire. No one was in control of fire, as it came about. No one was in control of, figuring out how to, move water from one spot to the next. No one was in control of salting your food. I mean, with seawater, of course, the British did eventually get around to trying to attempt that with, the East India Trading Company and their attempt to try and commodify India, not so much as a culture, but as a subject, and that backfired. But I mean, that was all part of that sort of mindset of an old way of thinking. And what I'm saying now is that we're moving into a higher realm of complexity with how we manage things in regards to the global community, because everyone wants to play by their own rules now, and they have the means to back that up, and nothing short of, a fiction of war, and war is a fiction, will deter that, or give the illusion that it's being deterred, and that's really what it is. So remember this before I say anything else. Each country has, and this is the other component, each country collectively has 5 lies that they are in agreement that they will always tell their general publics. 1, it's not possible, and that's another way of saying it's not possible because we don't have control yet. 2, just a little further. You know what I mean? They string us along with what's possible, and they say this isn't possible because they don't either A, have control over yet, and then they'll string us along in a particular idea of where technology should go and what they want us to embrace, but they're also seeding the general populace's epistemology and mentality and desire to adapt to things, or be subsumed by them, or have them doled to them by those governments. And those other 2 lies or fictions, or not true, half-truths, are that they know the best, and it's not just that they know the best, there's also a component of trust them. Now, in regards to that, there's a massive segment of things that fall under that, and those I'm not going to go into, because I just wanted to outline that. Now, how that relates to what we're talking about right now is in regards to three main things that we're talking about here. And what we're really talking about is artificial intelligence. We're talking about, real artificial intelligence as it relates to you as a human being. Cybernetics, and as it relates to the alleged singularity and you merging with machines. And how, regardless of, as a caveat to that, how everything they told you about it is untrue. As someone who's been really avidly doing some serious research over the last, maybe 8 years, I guess, since 2010, what I've come to the realization of, and some actual experimentation and some delving into, technological developments and actually developing some technology, none of which I'm going to really go too deep into, but I want to use this as a stepping stone to kind of elaborate some things for you, which is, in part one of this conversation, and there will be 4 or, whatever I deem necessary at this point, but I'm shooting for 4. So what we have here is when we talk about artificial intelligence, let's just go down the list, right? And cybernetics and, merging with it. Let's just say question 1, right? What are the pros and cons of becoming a cyborg? Well, what are the pros and cons? Delete everything they ever told you what the pros and cons are. And the reason why is because they are waiting to get to a point where they can manage the technology in a way where they can, if they hook you up, they can shut you off. And when I say shut you off, I don't mean brick your technology. I mean, or give you, the lesser version, or continuously move the technology forward in such a way where they can do that, because I want to make this about what are the real positives for you as an individual. So let's talk about the they a lot less in this conversation moving forward. So the pros. If you become merged with the machine, your utilitarian capacity is increased. Now, I'm coming from my perspective on what my research has brought me to, and something in regards to where I'm at now. And I guess I need to say this before I say what are the pros and cons in total. Myself, I have made the decision with a few other people to actually cross that chasm. And I know what you're thinking, like, whoa, did you talk to, corporation A or B or a person with said funds or whatever? No, I didn't, because that would be a complete waste of time, because as I'm understanding it now in terms of industrial design and fabrication and actually programming the technology, writing the software, developing the AI as it's going to go inside of you, managing the AI so it doesn't complicate your existence. The pros are this: you become a superhero. Now, when I say you become a superhero, that depends on what level of adaptation and connectivity you have with the machine. That means, are you, does the machine, how deeply are you connected? How much telemetry is it pulling out of you? So the pro is that the more capable you are after you've become a cyborg and merged with artificial intelligence, the stronger you are in every area. Try to imagine going into a nuclear meltdown situation where you're just driving down the road and you get a warning, nuclear power plant's messed up, and you're the only cyborg in the area, right? And let me establish this statement too. Everything we've understood about what a cyborg is, or even Hollywood's Days Future Past interpretation or explanation of what a cyborg is false. In fact, the closest thing that might come to what that could possibly be in terms of utilitarianism is how the reference of pop culture phenomenon, The Matrix, specifically the original one, references being able to download an awareness, but it's realistically more like the machine is walking you through it. So you walk into a building, it's got a map of it, it knows where it is, it knows where everything's at, it's got the blueprints, it's like go upstairs, take the elevator. It's walking you through the process of resetting the cooling chambers, resetting the catalytic process, and bringing the heat levels down so that the critical mass that the fission reaction was having is now brought back under control. Coolant is reestablished. Any sort of flood valves of that relate to the process have been, it's back under control. Like, I'm sorry, my knowledge of nuclear fission is good, but explaining the process of shutting down a thermonuclear reaction that's controlled for the purposes of generating heat and the purposes of getting the reactor rods to generate that heat by boiling the water, by capping it and making steam, and then turning the generators, and then that being pushed via DC into your home, into a down version of AC power. Yeah, so that you'd be driving down the road and you could fix that. Or if you saw someone with a broken leg, with the bone sticking out, and you'd never had a CPR class, the system will walk you through what you're going to do next. And as it's reading your biological telemetry, it's telling you how much force to apply. Or if someone's neck is, a shoulder's dislocated, things like that, medical things, stitching up someone or putting a hole in their trach so they can continue breathing, Or showing up in the middle of a situation where there's a car crash and you're assessing the situation and there's been a truck crash, and how to, number one, it's calling 911 for you, it's establishing it's emailing them also, it's informing them, hey, listen, I'm on the ground, this is what's happening, I'm at this plant, there's this truck tipped over, there's this many casualties, this many people have this many types of injuries. So it's pulling telemetry from you, and it's giving feedback to help in those situations. Or someone's robbing a bank and you just so happen to be in there and you're looking at this person, and it's in your secondary peripherals like cameras or even like a LiDAR, if you will. And another one that's really cute, a MiFi or a Li-Fi, I believe it is reading the topographical layout of their face, and it's telling the police, hey, so-and-so's robbing the place. Or you always have an eidetic memory because you never forget. So it's one of those things where the system is always recording that kind of data, and you're given the option to do that. Or, for example, let's say, never mind your alarm clock, it's always going to wake you up based on your schedule. Or you're always going to have the ability to call and communicate. Now, there's layers of things and questions you may have about how does a system like that work? And we'll get into that in a little more. So the pros are also, money management. Like if you're working a job but you're looking for better jobs, you're always in a position where on your leisure time, the system will walk you through how to learn how to do things. Oh, you just want to be a bartender for now. Oh, you want to be able to ride a boat. Like, we're talking about going and CLEPing courses and things like that, and just testing out, which some colleges still let you do nowadays. Or even dealing with the reality of, try to imagine this. You have a society that basically never went to college, but they're sporting multiple PhDs, because the time it takes a regular person to try to convey to you knowledge and information in a meaningful way that you're really just kind of memorizing, or you may be trying to learn to understand, the system is basically doling it back to you in a fragment of that amount of time, for a micro fraction of the amount of money, if you're even going to waste that, even if there's even any charges related to it. Now you're in a situation where you're learning everything you need to know to move into the job market, or even into a position where people who would value those skills will say, I'm going to hire you. I'm going to hire you because you're always going to know what you have to do. And even if you don't, your machine is going to walk you through it. And sometimes they just need people to do that. And realistically, that's what I've been noticing lately too, is that a lot of times they don't really want the guy who actually went to school for it anymore, unless that's the type of establishment it is. But the majority of establishments that are trying to gain, access into those marketplaces and get those big corporate other contracts and so on and so forth, are looking for people that they can just play musical chairs with and fill the bodies that actually have a general knowledge of what they're supposed to do. But at the point where you show up and you know exactly how to work every single piece of equipment, granted you may not be as fast, but you still know exactly how to do it because the machine is walking you through what you're doing, And it's inside of you. So it's this direct connection between you auditorily and the system you're working with. So those are the pros. And then there's also a ton of health benefits. A ton of health benefits. And I'll address that in a minute. But those are all the pros. Never mind the fact that like a properly developed system is, there's a level of security where like, you're walking by your RIDF, flicking your payment for your bills, your payment for your food. So you're not carrying physical cash anymore. So the notion of getting robbed, isn't an issue. Try to imagine you're a woman and you're going on a date, and you're going on a date with a guy who's a total sex offender, and you wouldn't have known had not the visual peripherals that are attached to your person are looking this person over. It's like, yo, this dude's a sex offender. Just got out 2 months ago. You know what I mean? Like there's levels to this thing where you can not just protect yourself, but as a woman, if you're a single mother, the guy you were just getting ready to go out on a date with, who seemed really nice, that you've been getting in touch, getting to know for like the last 2 weeks, is the worst person to bring around your family, especially your children. The absolute worst. And I don't even want to go too deep into that, but as a pro, I think as if I was a woman who was a single mother, in any situation or in any capacity, it would be nice to know that the guy I'm dealing with isn't, a hazard to my life, or trauma waiting to happen. So there's that. Or the fact of like never getting lost again, because your system always knows where you're at, what you need to do to get out of that situation. No longer getting lost in the woods, managing, getting bit by a snake, all so many different health and economic benefits that come with being a cyborg, directly connected to a machine. Now let's address the cons. Now remember, this is me explaining this to you as I understand it from my perspective of what I've been fortunate enough to learn about why people like to tease us with this, but never actually deliver. And if you notice the pattern of, research is find someone who's, disabled or handicapped or experiencing that type of situation, right? Or experiencing handicap and so on and so forth. And taking and preying upon their desperation and getting them to guinea pig and test out the technology. And to some extent, they're very happy. But the reality of the matter is they're really using them to feel it out. And as a con, the cons come come from as you move into a real project, or as I'm seeing what it means to me. Like the cons are not those people. The cons are the companies that, if we don't move forward and spearhead this as a general, human consensus, and someone doesn't at least says, I'm going to do this, then we end up in a situation where the cons are corporations, are flicking our switches and making us, think and feel certain things, because now they're manipulating us biologically because we gave them access to ourselves, or even more unfortunate things as I see them in a much more real sense. If we are, now remember, this is if we take control of the process. Downside is being, people attempting to marginalize you because you are, utility-wise, you're more advanced, because, you're the guy who can walk into a foreign country and sit down and have a conversation with 8 different languages and, with multiple dialects from those countries, and it's not a sweat for you because you're listening to them, your system's real-time translated, similar to what some companies are trying to give you that's already on your phone, but not in a meaningful way where you're sitting there having these conversations. And another component to that is you're learning as you're doing. So it's immersion on training wheels, but accelerated. So now you're in those situations, and that will make you the kind of person, whereas even though it's even though it's a perk or a pro, it becomes a con because you're now dealing with other people who are uncomfortable because they're like, it's alluring, they like it, but then there's people who are like, whoa, I'm a little uncomfortable that this person is talking to me, and it's really not them, it's the machine telling them, and am I being manipulated? And you know what I mean? So there's levels to that. And then there's the issue with, when you go to the airport, you're going to have to deal with the hassles of, you're going to deal with countries who may not want you in their country because they're like, oh, that's a cyborg. We don't understand that yet. We don't have a grasp on it yet. And so there's that problem. But you're going to eventually find yourself in situations where if you travel to other countries as a cyborg, And we've managed to, as a people, maintain the dignity attached to people, participating in that new lifestyle. That is a new lifestyle. It's not just a new lifestyle, it's a new lifestyle paradigm. So that as you move into that, now you got to deal with people in other countries who are like, where are your papers? Or, like the people who lose jobs because you're the guy who comes in and replaces everyone. Or you're the guy who gets people who might have been blue collar fired. So now you have to deal with the blue collar mobs of people who were making good money, but now you show up to a company and you're replacing all those jobs because now you're the one that's training, you're the one that's, refitting the company in terms of like, how do, you're doing, like, think about it. Like, you're doing taxes. You know how to file the tax forms. You know all the tax codes. You know all this crap. Now, you have a machine walking you through all that stuff. And eventually you get good at it, and eventually your machine is learning internally with you how fast can it bring you along. You know what I mean? So there's that. That's a downside. And then the downside is dating. You're going to find yourself in situations where the average person who doesn't have that system inside of them, as their Jiminy Cricket, if you will, is going to feel a little intimidated. You're going to intimidate a lot of people because they're going to be sitting there thinking to themselves that they're X, Y, and Z. And nothing could be further from the truth when the guy shows up who's, who knows more, or the gal shows up who knows more, and then factor in the reality that, without giving away too many secrets, there are problems directly related to the fact that, like, people will just not be okay with you having an edge over them that they cannot compete with. And that's going to be something we have to address. But I'm assuming that as things, no, I'm not assuming, I'm understanding. Let me rephrase that. I'm understanding that as we move forward, it's going to become a necessity for people to address that desire for people who are in now the cyborg community to have places where they can live without the BS. Because if you're a cyborg and you're making good money like that, you're fine. Now, another con is that I definitely believe that it is an absolute catastrophic hazard to allow people who, number one, work in politics, number two, work in banking, number two, are working under a 501c3 as for a religious organization, or even as, like, I think people who are running 501c3s definitely need to be vetted first. But I think as a safety measure, I don't think religious institutions, banking institutions, or political, affiliations, tacitly or otherwise, should have access to the technology, because that's just it won't work. Because it's not about making the system stronger at doing things it's doing right now that are, a complete disadvantage to the public. I mean, let's be honest. Like, our religious, our governmental, and our political institutions are 90% of the 95% of the problem with the human experience. And if anyone tells me different, I mean, I will take that rhetoric laden, debate or discussion. And I will dump it on its head and take its lunch money in the first paragraph. That's just me, though. Needless to say, though, those will be the cons, is that there will be a whole class of people who are not allowed to participate in that adaptation, or, that cruise control type of reality, or, again, that lifestyle paradigm shift. Because that's a lifestyle paradigm shift when you're not in that state of not knowing anymore. And you can always meet other people who have learned and adapted new things and share, software or programs or experiences at that level of, like, this is how you do it. You know what I mean? So, like, this constant life learning thing at breakneck, almost near lightning speed is a con, because that creates a barrier for people to learn. And it's like, it's John Henry, except this time John Henry is going against John Henry merged with, the steam machine. Not to give Noel a little, notoriety tickle, but I'm just kind of putting it out there, like, no pun intended. So that's definitely a con. And there's definitely the con of, like, dealing with the fact that, there's a level of responsibility that as a cyborg you are going to be expected to adhere to as an augmentee that no one else is. And the crazy part is there may be no laws even that exist telling you can and can't do certain things, but just as I understand it, no, you're going to have to take those, you're going to have to take those attributes as an individual and just apply them yourself. Because if you don't, you may end up, you may create a situation where other cyborgs are punished as a group for the dumb things you do. And you have to respect that is, you have to expect that and respect that will be a problem. And not pretend like you didn't know. And that's another thing, is that you can't feign ignorance anymore as a cyborg. You're going to have trouble, again, you're going to have trouble dating, because you're going to find yourself in situations where the dating pool is pretty stagnant. Because now that you are in a position where you're like really an international, viably, an international, employable, viable commodity as an individual, who's got this thing, you're not a one-trick pony, so you're going to stick around a little bit longer. And there will be issues of, as a con, like, am I slated for this level of that? And then that becomes a matter of like, how are you applying your augmentation in terms of self-betterment? You know what I mean? So there's an internally competitive issue there, and that's a matter of spiritually adjusting yourself to what you're capable of and what your technology will allow you to do. Because I definitely believe that just because let me put it this way, here's a con. Here's a real con. Not like the rest isn't, but here's a serious con, is that you're going to find yourself in a situation where you are debating, do I go to college or and create the debt I'm going to get and hope the job I want is still available, or do I go? Because see, here's the thing, is that here's the con, is you don't just wake up tomorrow and you go to the hospital and it's like a breast job, a cosmetic surgery where you're down for maybe a week or a month max. No, like, getting augmented to become a cyborg is going to be something that causes you to disappear. Get this now, disappear for anywhere from a year to 3, max maybe 4 to 5 years. And you're probably thinking, why does it take so long? Because you have to psychologically be trained to adjust to what that relationship is going to be like. Because once it's in you, it's going to be an expensive, once that expensive surgery goes through, it's going to be possibly an even more expensive surgery to remove it from you if you don't want to be in that zone anymore. That's not to say you can't turn your system on or off, but you're going to be in that situation where you may be like, oh, I'm getting persecuted. So you have to, you have to really want to be that type of person. You're going to have to like sit down and learn how to use the software before it's even put in you. You're going to have to learn how to use the interface between you. You're going to have to learn how to maintain yourself in situations in order to be able to maximize the user potential out of the system. And you're going to have to understand that, like, that voice will always be there. Even if it's off, it's always there. You're never alone, but it's okay. And then it's going to be problematic when you're trying to be intimate with people, because you may have one or two idiots who are going to be like, well, I record all my sexual encounters, or I keep a record of all the guys I sleep with. You know what I mean? It's kind of silly that way, but it definitely won't give rise. Put it this way. It is not for the selfie culture. Which is why you'll have to disappear for that amount of time to really understand that this is not a game anymore. You are different in a way that the rest of society is not different. You will be, there will be less cyborgs in the first generation than there are, people in the military, by a factor of, fractionally speaking, 10, to 100. You know what I mean? So there's like, you wake up per country, per capita. It's like let's see, for every 100,000, for every 10,000 people you run into, three of them might be a cyborg, and that's on the far end, but realistically, every 100,000 to 1 million people you run into, 10 of them or maybe even 100 of them. Realistically, maybe 10 or 5 of them are a cyborg. So it's a small community within the first 2 generations, and you have to understand that. But you also have to understand that, like, again, other cyborgs will know each other. So it's a small community. So you can't go out and do something stupid and then have cyborgs speak well of you, because they're like, yo, like, this guy does not have a good merged relationship with his technology, and it shows. He does not use his technology to better himself or herself to better society. And then there's components where there's going to be strength increases. And I don't mean strength increases like I've got bionic arms, I'm $6 million man, cyborg like that, because I don't necessarily advocate per se that type of cyborg, augmentation, although I'm sure someone will eventually come along and push that. But there are ways to augment human strength and capacity without actually adding, other modifications that, I wouldn't say supplement, but substitute 100% your God-given, appendages, your naturally, occurring appendages. And there's ways to do that. And that will be an issue as it comes along. But then again, it's one of those things where you have to, you got to go away and learn how to do this. You got to go away and learn how to be a person who can manage themselves in those situations. You have to take the high road all the time. It's like, yeah, you're a superhero now to a degree. So you can't just be like, it's just not, it's not a fun ride. Sure, you're going to have fun, but again, you never know. Like, it may be, I definitely advocate that every cyborg should have, like, their cyborg buddy. Cyborgs come in groups of 2s. I think you should definitely have somebody that you're going to be doing cyborg stuff with as a companion, so that you never are in a disadvantaging situation where you have to try to advocate for yourself. And granted, it would hope that cyborgs don't end up, lying for each other. But I think at that level, it'll be pretty obvious to catch when a cyborg is lying about something. Needless to say, it will be problematic because it will be a small community. It will not be a large group. You will not you'll have places where you go where people welcome you with open arms. They can't wait to see you. They know that you're going to better their situation. And that's what it's about, is that you have to learn. And that's what those 4 years are. So here's that other thing. It's like they're not giving people access to, that merger until they've got it down to a science where they can make it commodifiable, where they say, I guarantee you, if we'd have waited a generation, right, from now, today, this moment you hear this, it's January the 18th, 2018, right? So corporations will gladly make us wait corporations will gladly make us wait a good 2 generations until they have the technology to a place where they can completely control it, and they can pick and choose the type of social environment they want. So anyone with $1 million or $2 million can get augmented or connected to a computer, but realistically speaking, I see the technology is actually something, and this goes back to the college thing, and going away for 3 to 5 years, which is you're gonna need to learn what it means to be this, to necessitate, what necessitates, the use of your abilities. Because you're going to be in situations where you cannot get involved, and because everything you do reflects badly on being a cyborg and what cyborgs get involved with. And this goes back to the whole political thing of, as a cyborg, don't get involved in religious issues. Do not get involved in economic, banking things. Do not get involved in political movements or political parties, because you're not there for that. You're not there. And at this point, I think we should all know that politics is a fiction. There's so many, historically documented, provable truths that, completely contradict certain religious doctrine or parable. And, and that's all religions. So at that level, you're recognizing the allegory of things. And you have to learn that, like, listen, you cannot be emotionally swayed by a good story, And people will say, oh, well, and people will say, oh, well, you're a devil worshiper automatically, you're a godless people, you worship Skynet or something like that. And that's a con that you have to deal with people's prejudice. Because remember, they wouldn't be prejudiced if listen, let me tell you this. If Skynet was a thing, Meanwhile, I'm saying that as I'm using, Miles Dyson's image, who was a fictional character in the movie Terminator, right? 2, Judgment Day, as the individual who created Skynet. Like, as a fiction, right? If it was all the things they said it was, but then suddenly someone was able to make it a Christian version or an Islamic version, or, a Muslim version, or, a Buddhist version or a Jewish version or, Catholic version, it would probably, go on a killing spree. And before it went on a killing spree and killed people that did not have the same religion, it would probably kill more people in its own religious denomination first for sinning, against their deity, right? That it's programmed to worship or adhere to the doctrines of. So for that reason, again, and even in banking, it's all fun and games until the machine's like, yo, you're problematic. Because fast eat the slow, big don't necessarily eat the small. And if the thing is processing financial information faster than you and understanding all the codes and things, it's making financial gains, in ways that you can't even comprehend, gaming the system in an asynchronous manner. Where even if you did get the money to try to get yourself back together, it's already commodified and, it owns the board now. Like, the money's probably not even worth that anymore, at that level. So, again, no cyborgs in banking and you'll be, there'll be a problem with that. People are going to have a problem with that. And some people are going to find ways to, as a con, try to create that kind of environment, and it's going to backfire. And as it backfires, as a cyborg, you're going to be on those pundit talking head shows advocating how cyborgs don't get involved in that, and that's exactly why, like, can you imagine that? Like, you're up here, there's a guy like, oh, this guy was a cyborg and he was a banker and he bought up our whole town and he ruined us, and he's been doing that, and there's no laws to protect us from that. And then you're trying to come out and to explain to people that, well, actually, as cyborgs, we're not allowed to, as based on the cyborg code that I'm aware of and I came through, we're not allowed to participate in things like that because it's haphazard. It causes more problems than it creates. And if anyone has an advantage over everyone else in terms of that situation, they will cause problems. So for that reason, you're going to have to deal with that a lot. You're going to have to deal with the mixed cyborgs, if you will. And they will come. There will be, brand X cyborg. There will be brand B. But this goes back to the original thing of, that's a con that, you have to, it's a con. But it's a con that's kind of a pro because at least you're learning. So all the pros that relate to being a cyborg are just a byproduct. All the cons that relate to being a cyborg are byproducts of the pros, in terms of the haves and have-nots. And people, like I said, people are going to have to decide, do I take money out of the bank to get a student loan to either A, go to college and deal with that, whatever the job market is in the future, or do I go and become a cyborg and throw myself into the world sphere and benefit the world that way, and find yourself getting handsomely rewarded for it, because there's anything because you get to a point where there's nothing you can't do. And that's, again, going to be problematic for some people because, it's like, here's just, think about it. We're dealing with a reality where, like, for example, I'm in my 40s, right? I just turned 40, right? So I'm imagining how hard it is to, to keep a job, get new jobs, things like that. And what I'm understanding is that a lot of times my biggest issue is not that, I'm in better shape, having been a former Marine and just generally, being a healthy person. I'm in better shape than 90% of the millennials that I come in contact with. They're just really grossly out of shape. Like, not made of sturdy stuff. Might as well have the consistency of of Jello, or a Triscuit. And that's not a slap in their face. That's just the nature of, how their lifestyles are, Is that all of them? No, but it's like, I guarantee you they're not built that way. But moving along, so it becomes a situation where people are going to be making those choices, and they're going to be away from society for like 3 years to 5 years. And you'll be like, oh, I've got $1 million. I'll just buy the best program you've got. And then you're going to find yourself in a weird situation where it's like, it doesn't work that way. It's like there's so many responsibilities that come along with that. Because that's like, and people say, oh, you just can't be that way. It's like, well, we don't actually, like you got to remember, we're operating on a social mentality that has its birthplace over 300 to 500 years ago. And we're still just coming to a place now where we can exit that. And we're just barely getting there. We're just barely getting there. And then we still have people who want to facilitate it. So for that reason, it's just like, you know what? It's like we have issues where people will try to keep us in a space, or individuals will try to keep us in a space where they can try to keep that going, and it's problematic. I mean, like, I think this is not a great example, but I'll give you an example, which is, just, in terms of pop culture references, the nature of Luger in the fictional science fiction story Elysium with actor Matt Damon. I think that was a Blomkamp film. I think it was a no Blomkamp film. It might have been. I could be wrong. Jodie Foster was in it too. But it showed you how people were using cyborgs not to help, but to oppress people. So, you know what I mean? Like we can keep citing those references. I mean, like, come on. Like the 80s is full of movies where cyborgs are just dangerous. And even the 90s too. You know what I mean? Like, it's funny. But those are all your cons. I'm sure if I missed any, bring them up. Let's talk about them. Let's move it forward. But I'm only telling you what I've discovered and what I'm understanding about my experience in regards to that. I can only communicate that. So, at that level, that's what I'm aware of. That's what I can tell you. So I'm communicating that for all intents and purposes. So, next question. I'm just going to keep going with this until it's no longer poignant in that way. But we're getting there, right? We are, aren't we? Yeah, cool. So, needless to say, another concern. Question number 2, right? And remember, I'm speaking about this from the perspective of someone who is actively pursuing becoming, actually taking what they've learned about how to create that type of technology. And keep in mind, we're talking about we're in the process of developing the ability for people by 2020 to become merged with their technology or the machine, AI specifically, learning AI between yourself and just you in such a way where the process would cost the average person anywhere from 20 to 50 grand as a base starting process, all the way up to maybe $250,000. And it's really not that expensive. And think about it. People will have to debate: do I get plastic surgery or do I get an education, or do I go to a trade school and rack up this debt? You know what I mean? Like, do I go into adult entertainment with that debt, or do I go into, whatever field of work that a college degree will have jobs available for by that time, or even at this moment? It's like, do I do that, by 2020, or even now? Like, do I spend that money? So for that reason, I'm speaking about people becoming 5th generation cyborgs, and there's a differential between the first cyborgs, pacemakers. Like we're talking about people going from the first generation of cyborgs that were just having technology placed inside of them in their body to augment a function that was lacking, right? Or compensate for complete biological failure in some ways, all the way to the point now where people are using their technology to a degree recreationally. For example, there was a gentleman who had surgically implanted on his arm his iPod Nano, come to think of it. So it looks like a watch, whatever. And again, I mean, like, it took me a while to really understand what I was looking at in regards to that, which is people are going to merge with technology in ways you may not agree with. Like, for example, people are putting magnets in their hands so that it allows them to move metal objects, things like that. Flip switch things, lots of things like that. People are merging with RIDFs, and those are somewhere between, as I understand it, second and third generation. And there's people now who are adding new types of technology, right, that are strictly recreational, or just adding new sensory capabilities, like being able to hear sound, hear color, or sense earthquakes, or sense which way north is. And good on them. However, I'm looking at it from the perspective of, like, for the world to really make some dynamic change, we need to actually just quit, soft footing around and kid gloving, and just go on ahead and merge with AI and be done with it. And understand everything they keep telling us about AI is not true. Because if it was, we would either A, be in a Terminator situation, we'd be in a Judgment Day situation in that way, a la Skynet, pop culture reference there. Or, I think a really good example is an animated, series on Netflix, another pop culture reference, called Blame or Blam, depending on how you want to, pronounce it. But you can reference those, but understand that, like, if what they have told us to this point was true about the technology, we would be in one of those situations by now. Instead, we're in a situation where they're using fragments of it to control how we socialize, how we are allowed to get certain jobs, and they're using algorithms and things of that nature to be problematic for us. And those are cons. But those are cons based on what they're only able to eke out of the technology, because they have not gotten it to a point where you can walk in and get a $20,000 to $50,000 starter pack, or a $50,000 to $100,000 or $250,000 starter pack as a cyborg, and they don't have it. And if they had it, you would have got it by now. And that's the reality of the matter, is that they can't sell you on the technology yet, because they don't know how to convince you to have to allow them to have complete disclosure in real time at all times of your body. And the way I'm suggesting and pushing to develop this technology as I move forward with my desire, again, to develop myself as a pioneer, 5th generation cyborg, getting back to that, which is, again, people adding sensory abilities as an augmentation, not to, also to compensate, but also artistically too. And I understand that that's somewhere between 3rd generation and 4th generation. But what I'm saying is, for 5th generation, no. We have to directly become that for the purposes of bettering society, or not at all. Now, some will argue, well, being a 4th, 3rd to 4th generation, and adding sensory capabilities and so on and so forth. And let us not forget the cyborgs, who are somewhere between 3rd and 4th, who are people who are interacting directly with the technology as a utility, in the recreational sense and the leisurely and just the average everyday quality of living purposes, having the quality of living purposes raised, right? So they're getting, augmentations like arms, legs, because they have to, because they've been injured, or, and again, this creates that window for corporations to try to, guinea pig people. And at that point, I have to say, good on those people, though, for getting their mobility back and things like that. Because, as a veteran, I've been very lucky not to end up losing any limbs, right? So I've been fortunate in that way. So I have a limited, if not, a limited point of perspective on that, if not, from my personal experience of knowing people. But still, I don't know. Although I will acknowledge that, there was a time where my injuries that I did receive while I was, on active duty in a combat zone were crippling temporarily for a year. And it took them a while almost 2 years. And, and to a degree it was actually 3 years, but like to the point where like I was in and out of a wheelchair, excruciating pain, any sort of cybernetic implant that could have managed that would have been wonderful, but no such thing existed in a way where it was, readily accessible in the open market without, clearing, completely liquidating any sort of insurance plan that I had at the time or even now. So that is that. So in regards to becoming a 5th generation cyborg, it's a lifestyle paradigm shift, and I'm ready to kind of embrace that because that's just kind of where I'm at, That's where I'm at. And I think that's where people who would want the technology after 3 years of learning what it's, because you'll learn like, this isn't as easy as you think. You don't just show up one day and, hey, let me help you unlock that. You don't know what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know why they want that unlocked. So it's like, you're just not out there wild. You're not out there wild, So next question is, how safe is the system I intend to use? Wow, that is a great question. How safe is the system I intend to use? Well, the system I intend to use, for lack of a better expression, is essentially going to be operating under the design acronym of, cruise. It's cruise control. And cruise essentially is, I've already trademarked that. Cruise control is basically an acronym for cybernetic real-time user synchronized experience. So I'm synchronized with my little machine inside of me, while I'm also synchronized with the major hub. So it's me, it's the major hub that's running, all of the heavy lifting thinking in conjunction with running a small version of itself. So let me put it this way. It's me and 5,000 other or 500 cyborgs, right? And we all show up and we're protesting, the Not Me movement, or I'm sorry, the Me Too movement, right? And we're supporting women and their rights, and the Time's Up movement also. And I'm using that as an example because, again, we're not supposed to get involved in that stuff. So instead, let's say we're protesting. Well, no, we're not even protesting. Let's say we all show up and we decide, and we're doing business with a particular establishment, and we say, hey, look, we're all cyborgs. Let's get our money out of these banks. So we go to a particular bank one day and we all start pulling our money out. As we're pulling our money out, they do things to try to prevent us from accessing the airwaves to network, to know where we're supposed to be going to get to these banks, right? Because all of a sudden we find out one day, hey, these banks are messed up. All right, well, let's all pull our money out today. So they're trying to jam the airwaves. They're, messing, trying to create denial of service attacks, things like that, which won't work on the system that I'm looking to use. For a myriad of reasons, security reasons, I'm not going to necessarily go into. I'll give a few hints in a moment, but just walk with me on this one. So they decide they're going to shut down the network so we can't talk. Now there's 500 to 1,000, 5,000 of us or so on or whatever. And, give or take a few. And at that moment, they went from having a big target to having, a lot of little targets that are still networked together. And people say, well, how do you network together if they cut down the cell thing? It's like, because there's other ways for people to communicate that you have to be aware of. And technologically speaking, like, we think cell phones are the only way people can talk to each other, and we have no idea that there's other systems. And someone will be like, oh, no, that's not how it, Okay. Again, people will keep telling you things in regards to what's possible until they get to the point where they can commodify it. And that's what we're at now, that the technology has moved beyond the ability to create the illusion of what's possible and what's allowable. So for that reason, swatting the hive just scatters the swarm. And a scattered swarm is worse than a swarm that's huddled in its hives. You know what I mean? And when I say huddled in its hives, are we all suddenly thinking like, attack, we must attack this thing? It's like, no, we're not. But just as a common sense method, it's like, no, like, as a cyborg, you wouldn't want that. Why would I want to let this bank rip me off because I'm a cyborg, or because or maybe this bank has some bad political activities about it, or maybe they're, they've been washing drug money or washing money that has something to do with human trafficking. Why would I want to keep my money in that bank, right? So, as an active warrant, as an active alert, we all just say, hey, let's get out. So they start trying to, block us from being able, because they can't tell us we can't take the money out. They already got enough scandal going on. They're about to be insolvent in I don't know, 2 minutes. If they're not already insolvent, which they are. Yeah, do your research on that. Banks are insolvent from the moment they conduct their first loan. Anyway, which is ridiculous. So at that level, trying to cut people off just scatters the swarm, and that becomes a lot more dangerous. You don't get stung to death when the bees and the hornets, the yellow jackets and what have you are all in the hive, and the drones are all in the hive. You get stung, when they're in the hive and calm. You get stung when they're out of the hive and they're trying to figure out what the problem is. And as they, maintain their interconnected conversations and communications, then as they see what the problem is, that's when the problem happens, the minute you scatter the swarm. So we're talking about a different use of swarm technology. We're talking about someone's lost, right? How safe is that system? Again, so now we're talking about, because again, remember, all the pros go right back to a juxtaposition of all the cons in relation to people wanting to, no longer being able to be satisfied with what their reality is. So in regards to that, what we have is, right, we have a situation where if someone wants to hack your system, it's not happening. I have to be very careful about how I communicate the security measures that we will put in place. But let me put it this way: forget your quantum computer. It's not going to work. It's just not going to work. It's not going to work. I have to be careful not to give away the ghost on that one, but it's a waste of time. In fact, the idea of hacking it is, not a smart thing to do. I would have to say that if someone wants, I would say this: you'll have a less ruined life or day hacking a government computer. And I'm not suggesting you do that, but I'm saying you would stand to not harm yourself hacking a government computer instead of hacking something like this, because of the nature of how it functions. It's not going to be on a Windows setup. It's not going to be on a Linux setup. It's not going to be on an Android setup, a Lime, a Jello, Mellow, any of those things. Yet it'll still be able to interface the internet, but it won't be, no. So even in that, and this goes back to becoming a cyborg again, where it's a community. Where why would I give away another cyborg's, security stuff? You know what I mean? Like that makes no sense. That's jeopardizing, what that is. So they're trying to sell us on these ideas about days future past, about what it's about, and nothing could be further from the truth. But again, no, you're not hacking this system. You want to not try that. You don't want to try that. And in terms of safety also, here's another component to that, which is